Some people just don't understand the word no until you teach them a lesson they'll never forget. That's exactly what happened with my HOA's president, Karen, who thought my garden hose was her personal property. At first, it was just small things. A little bit of water missing, a slightly damp nozzle, nothing major. But soon I noticed a pattern. Every morning my hose was stretched across the yard, dripping wet, even though I hadn't used it. My water bill crept up, and the mystery deepened. One afternoon I caught her red-handed, standing in my yard, watering her perfectly manicured flowers with my water like she owned the place. When I confronted her, she simply scoffed. "Oh, please, it's just water. Don't be so selfish," she said with that annoying smirk. That's when I knew she wasn't going to stop, and if words wouldn't teach her a lesson, maybe something else would. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where people kept their lawns trimmed, mailboxes polished, and gossip flowing faster than the morning coffee. And at the center of it all was Karen Donaldson, our self-proclaimed HOA queen. She wasn't just in charge, she ruled with an iron clipboard, enforcing rules that she herself ignored. Her front yard looked like a botanical garden with perfectly aligned rose bushes and a no unauthorized watering sign planted right in the middle. The irony? She wasn't using her own water to keep them alive. At first I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I had forgotten turning off the hose. Maybe the water pressure was acting up. But when my bill jumped up by nearly 30%, I knew something was wrong. Then one morning I woke up early and peeked through my blinds, and there she was, wrapped in her silk robe, watering her tulips, with my hose. I stormed outside trying to keep my cool and asked her politely, "Hey Karen, I think you're using my hose." She didn't even flinch. Instead she laughed, flipping her overprocessed blonde hair. "Relax," she said. "It's just a little water. You can't own water, you know." I stood there dumbfounded. She didn't ask. She just took, and she acted like she had the right to it. That's when I realized talking wasn't going to work. If Karen thought she could keep using my water without consequences, she had another thing coming. After that first confrontation, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would stop. Maybe she'd feel a little embarrassed about getting caught. I was wrong. Not only did she keep using my hose, but she became bolder about it. Now she didn't even wait for the early morning hours. She'd walk right into my yard in broad daylight, turn on the hose, and start watering her plants like it was the most normal thing in the world. One afternoon I was sitting on my porch when I saw her march over, grab the hose, and start spraying down her driveway, as if I had given her permission. This time I confronted her with a bit more frustration in my voice. "Karen, this is my property. You can't just take my water." She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Oh, don't be so uptight. You have plenty of water. I'm just using a little." I tried reporting her to the HOA, hoping they'd do something, but guess who was in charge? Karen herself. The next day I got a notice in my mailbox warning me about an unkempt lawn and improper hose storage. Seriously? She was the one stealing my water, and I was the problem? That's when I decided to take action. I set up a security camera to catch her in the act. The very next morning, the footage showed her sneaking over at 6 a.m., turning on my hose like she owned the place. It was all the proof I needed. But Karen didn't know that I was done playing nice. If she wanted to keep using my hose, she was about to get a surprise she'd never forget. I had given Karen every possible chance to stop. I tried being polite. I tried reasoning with her. I even had video proof of her stealing my water. But nothing worked, because Karen believed she was untouchable. That's when I realized, if she wasn't going to stop on her own, I'd have to make her stop. Now, I wasn't going to do anything illegal or dangerous, but I was going to make sure Karen never wanted to touch my hose again. And the perfect idea hit me: the septic tank. You see, my property had an old, unused septic system in the backyard. It wasn't connected to anything anymore, but it still held some of the most foul-smelling sludge imaginable. If I could redirect my garden hose to pull from that instead of my clean water supply, well, Karen would be in for a very unpleasant surprise. I spent the next few hours carefully working on my setup. First, I disconnected the hose from my main water line. Then I ran a hidden pipe leading to the old septic tank. To the untrained eye, everything looked normal. The hose was in the same spot, The nozzle was still functional, and unless someone actually turned it on, they'd have no idea that something was different. It was perfect. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. The very next afternoon, just like clockwork, Karen strutted over, looking smug as ever. She grabbed my hose, pointed it toward her flower bed, and turned the nozzle all the way up. I held my breath. At first, nothing happened. A slight delay. Then, a thick, brown, putrid-smelling liquid exploded out of the hose. It hit her prized roses first, coating them in what looked like liquid nightmare fuel. Then, the smell hit. The moment Karen realized what was happening, she let out a scream so loud birds flew out of the trees. She dropped the hose, gagging and stumbling backward, waving her hands frantically as if she could erase the stench from the air. But it was too late. Her hands, her shoes, even her fancy designer purse had been splattered. The once pristine HOA queen now looked like she had just lost a wrestling match with a porta potty. And I just sat back on my porch, sipping my lemonade, enjoying the show. For a few seconds, there was only silence. The kind of stunned, disbelieving silence that happens when someone's entire world shatters in an instant. Karen stood frozen, her once pristine beige blouse now stained with a foul, brown mess. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her face contorting in sheer horror and disgust. Then the screaming began. She staggered backward, waving her arms frantically, trying to wipe away the filth, but all she managed to do was spread it further. The smell? Absolutely unbearable. I had to admit, even from a distance, it was rancid, like a mixture of rotten eggs, sewage, and bad life choices. Karen gagged, then ran toward her house, but halfway there, she stopped, realizing something even worse. She had tracked it all over her precious driveway. I could barely keep a straight face. Meanwhile, my neighbors started noticing the commotion. A few of them peeked out their windows, then came outside to see what was going on. And when they saw the almighty HOA queen covered head to toe in septic sludge, well, let's just say I wasn't the only one laughing. Linda, the sweet old lady from across the street, gasped dramatically and clutched her pearls. "Oh dear, Karen, did you have a little accident?" Dale, the retired military vet, let out a deep belly laugh, shaking his head. Even Raj, our usually quiet neighbor, muttered, "Well, guess she got what she deserved." Karen, now fuming and humiliated, pointed a trembling, filthy finger at me. You did this!" she shrieked, but her voice cracked halfway through. I just leaned back in my chair, sipping my lemonade. "Did what, Karen?" "It's just a little water. You can't own water, remember?" Her face turned bright red, but she had no comeback, just more gagging as another whiff of the stench hit her nose. She stomped back to her house, slamming the door behind her. But the damage was done. By that evening, word had spread like wildfire. My security camera footage of her getting blasted with septic sludge mysteriously found its way into the neighborhood group chat. Within hours, it was all over social media. Someone even edited the footage into a meme, adding dramatic music and slow motion effects. And the best part? The HOA finally turned against her. The same board that once worshipped the ground she walked on now wanted nothing to do with her. It turns out people didn't love the idea of a president who trespassed and stole from homeowners. A few residents, including myself, filed complaints directly to the HOA's higher-ups, and within a week, Karen was removed from her position. As for me, my hose stayed exactly where it belonged, in my yard, untouched. And Karen? Well, let's just say she learned a very important lesson about boundaries, consequences, and why you should never mess with someone else's water. After Karen's septic shower incident, the neighborhood had never been livelier. For the first time in years, people weren't avoiding each other. They were bonding over the shared experience of finally watching the HOA tyrant get what she deserved. The once feared Karen was now the town joke. People started sharing their own Karen horror stories, how she had fined Linda for having a garden gnome, how she forced Raj to repaint his mailbox twice, and how she once threatened to call the cops on a kid's lemonade stand for being an unlicensed business. Turns out, nobody actually liked her, but no one had dared to stand up to her. Until now. Linda, ever the sweet old lady, baked me a pie as a thank you. Raj, who had been recording everything, put together a hilarious highlight reel of the event, and sent it to the group chat. Even Dale, the gruff Vietnam vet, gave me a nod of approval. Haven't laughed that hard in years, kid. And Karen, well, she had completely disappeared. For the next few days, her car stayed in the garage, her curtains remained shut, and for once, the neighborhood was peacefully quiet. No ridiculous fines, no unannounced visits, no angry notes on doors. It was perfect. Then just when we thought the drama was over, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. At first, we thought maybe she was just having something delivered, but when we saw her furniture being loaded in, we realized she was leaving. Apparently, the public humiliation, combined with the HOA removing her from power, was too much for her to handle. She couldn't stand living in a place where she was no longer in control. That evening, as the truck drove away, a wave of relief washed over the entire neighborhood. Karen was gone. We celebrated in the best way possible, a giant neighborhood barbecue. And as I stood there watching people laugh, chat, and enjoy themselves, I realized something. Karen might have ruled this place with an iron fist for years, but in the end, all it took to bring her down was a little dirty water. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the now peaceful neighborhood, I sat back in my chair, taking it all in. For the first time in years, Maplewood Lane felt normal. No ridiculous fines, no unexpected HOA meetings, no Karen lurking around looking for some minor rule to enforce. It was almost too good to be true. The whole situation had started as a simple annoyance, just a nosy neighbor stealing my water. But looking back, I realized it was never really about the hose. It was about control. Karen had spent years bullying and intimidating everyone, convinced that her rules were more important than the people living here. And honestly, we had let her get away with it for far too long. But in the end, she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. All it took was one clever idea, a little septic justice, and the right people standing together to bring her reign to an end. And while I'd never admit it out loud, there was something satisfying about watching her drive away for good, her nose still wrinkled from the memory of her incident. I took one last sip of my lemonade and smiled. No more stolen water, no more HOA tyranny, just peace. And the best part? My hose was exactly where it belonged.